Hey everybody, welcome back to part 2 of creating your own tabletop role-playing game. I hope everyone that watched part 1 enjoyed themselves and are back here for part 2. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend watching it just so you're caught up with where we're at. And really, without any further BSing, let's go ahead and get into this part 2. So, this one we're going to go into probability in mechanics. So you're done with your theme and you spent some time jotting down ideas for mechanics and hopefully researching what mechanics from systems you might like to add or just generally doing work on them overall for the idea portion of it. It's a great start and we're finally getting to a spot where we can be comfortable to play with ourselves. Yeah. So you won't be playing with anybody quite yet, as we actually want to test out if these things work or not. And by playing with the mechanics by yourself or with like a small group of friends or a partner is something that you'll probably be doing for a little while just to see what does and doesn't work, especially when it comes to dice, which is going to be our main topic for today. I myself am going to give you like a bunch of reasons behind why I think the dice choice is so important and why I think part 2 revolves around it the most. So I'm going to go ahead and start my rant. So when you have a dice system, I'm almost always thinking about probability and chance because it's a measure of likelihood of an event to occur in game. So many events can't really be predicted with total certainty. We can predict only really a chance of an event to occur. And this is true with any type of dice that you're using for a system that you choose, whether it's D100, D20, D10, D8, D6, or D4, or any other dice, including ones that aren't really widely available, like D3s or D7s. They can also be used, but they're a little harder to determine what works and what doesn't, so I like to stick to the primary dice sets people usually have, just to avoid confusion. But like I said, probability and chance are a huge part in system making because most people aren't going to be going into it as far as like a DM or you will. So let me just get into examples of why it's so important to focus so heavily on your mechanics involving your dice and the probability and chance of it. I'm going to do an easy explanation, really, really simple, maybe a sentence, and then I'm going to go into the why. By all means, skip through it if you're not really into the math portion of this or anything. But I highly suggest just listening to it just so we can get through it and you can understand a little bit further as to why it's so important. So, the easy explanation for one of this is depending on how high we want these checks to be, really determines what operating system we'll want because of the probability and chance of succeeding and failing. Now, that's the easy explanation, saying like we just really want to see what's going to work for the system versus what's not going to work for the system. Because there is a lot to think about when you're thinking, do you want combat to run on D100, D20, D10, D8, D6, or D4? And do you want skill checks to be D100, D20, etc, etc, right? So, depending on the system determines what chances or odds you have of success. And succeeding on a D100 may seem like it's easier to get a 50 or higher than above a 2 on a D4, but it's not always true because as the numbers are higher than a 4 count die, you still have a 50-50 shot on either die. So why is this important to know? Like the difference between a D100 getting a 50 or higher or a D4 getting a 3 or 4. Because it lets us understand that like no matter what the die is, the real system relies on the target for the number we're shooting for. In example, we want only about 75% or higher on a die 100 to succeed with a character, and maybe that character has a 5% bonus to this roll. And since it's a D100, it has 100 sides. We need 75 or higher to succeed. We already know 75, 25% makes up that. So 1/4 is what we really have to succeed on that die. And you could say the same thing with on a d4, it needs to be a 4. It can't be a 1, 2, or 3. It's got to be one of the numbers. So if it's a 4, that's still a 75% chance that you fail, but a 25 that you don't. And it works backwards. So if a character has a 5% bonus to that roll, it changes drastically for the D100 because it's no longer 75% you need to meet 70%. And the odds are low, but over time you also have to think this bonus for a character in a mechanic, no matter what mechanic you're going after, whether it's combat, whether it's skills, whether it's whatever you're going after, have potential to grow over time. And this could apply to all of these dice sets. And with this knowledge, we can accurately determine where we should make the mechanic easier or harder to accomplish depending on the dice. Because if it's a D100 and you're shooting, you need a 75 or higher. Okay, you have a 25% chance to do that. You have 5% bonus on your character. You now only need to beat 70%. So that gives you an odds of 30%. Now, however, we can't really cut 30% into a d4 because it's equally 25, 25, 25, 25. Or a d6 might make more sense because they're in chunks of about 15. So, depending on what system you really want or how you want it to work mechanically, it's going to change what it's going to do. Because if you go with the natural d20, you have 20 sides. So we can take a d10 and say d10 has 10 sides, 1 is 10%. Right? On a d10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, each side represents 10%, where 20 is going to be 5%. So it's going to be half of that of d10. So my point here is that really, depending on how hard or how easy you want this to be, really determines what dice set you should use. If you want it to be easier and less mathematical, going with a smaller die is much easier to accomplish than a higher die with, say, you have a odds of 24% of rolling whatever is a success. You can just straight up say, I have 25 to 50 to 75. And that's just all dependent on what numbers that you see as a success. And this is me kind of just referencing D&D for a moment, but like DC or difficulty check is going to be very important whenever you want to make a style of game or a mechanic for a TTRPG. Most of the time, dice are involved because they have some randomness to them. Now, talking about cards, I will touch on this just a little bit. Cards are very different because you can have a determined amount and determined outcome based on a card set, and then have somebody draw a card. And that is just as equal the amount of win-lose as about a 50-50, or however many win cards there are compared to how many loss cards there are, which you could switch out to make 10% good, 90% bad, 50% good, 50% bad, 20% bad, 80% good. It's just all dependent on how you want that system, that operating system to work. But that's going to be the main portion of what I'm trying to say here for this explanation, just because there's so much to do with probability and chance in games that you don't really think about at the moment, but it goes right into my second point. And the easy explanation for this one is people generally enjoy the outcome of rolling multiple dice sets compared to one larger die, no matter what bonuses they may have. Because how many die a person rolls, such as a 4d6, so 4d6s versus 1d20 plus 1d4, which feels better and why? Sometimes it's not just statistics that make the system feel good, it's what we're rolling. We've all experienced rolling a critical of some kind and roll more additional dice, or whether it be in war games, TTRPG, or board games, and hell, even some card games, people often prefer rolling multiple die over a single large dice because it creates a more predictable and consistent outcome. And with rolling multiple dice and summing up the results, it tends to produce a sort of bell curve distribution when you're doing the average results and making it more likely. And honestly, you're going to see a lot less extreme results from this. And this can be satisfying for very many players, as it allows them to feel more control of their actions and less subject to extremes of random chance. But we might also want that for our system, so that goes backwards as well, just so you know. This is great when you're trying to express a powerful strike or some sort of way to increase your odds of producing a win con for a character action such as a skill check or something like that. So when you're doing that with multiple dice, just be aware, like in D&D combat, sometimes you have weapons that deal 4d10 or 2d8 or 1d6 or 3d4. That's mainly because when we do hit, we feel better generally about doing so when we roll multiple dice. We're able to feel a lot better about what's going on. And so, for instance, there's just so much going on that a lot of people stick with a 1d20 for most skill checks and turn to other dice for damage in combat. Now, if this is not generally what you're looking for and this is something that you want to change and transform into your own creation, by all means do so. Because we want your game to be unique, we want what you're doing to be and feel unique to you specifically. Because what you don't want to do is take too much from too many sources and just rip off a bunch of different TTRPGs. What we want to do is take an idea and try to come up with something of our own. And so that's where here it's going to be really important to know what dice do you want to use for a game. Do you want to use cards, and do you want to do XYZ for XYZ reason? It could be combat, it could be skill checks, it could be character creation, it could be damages, it could be a slew of things. Maybe your checks with, character dialogue. Who knows? But with probability, we can really measure hard or easy something is. So, and that's where I want to kind of take you guys into what I've worked on for a long time. And so I'm going to use Reemergence, our sci-fi TTRPG, for example, just to give you an example of what I personally do for this specific game and gave it a very particular set of rules and made it very unique. And a lot of people that bought the game or played it love this mechanic and use it a lot for their homebrew as well. So we have something called Complexity Roll, which is a CR. It determines whether a character can perform an action they wish to do. The CR is a maximum number you have to beat to succeed in doing an action. CR is determined by the GM. And flat rate skill is the minimum required knowledge, skill, or just how beefy you are to do said action. So then we're going to go flip this right into flat rate, which we just condensed down to flat. So the flat is a base requirement of an attribute when making a roll and trying to complete an action. The flat is said and defined at the start of the player decided action, such as if the player wanted to move a heavy object. The flat applies to all rolls a player makes while doing that action. Think of a flat as a base knowledge of physique or knowledge needed to do that action specifically. So this is really interesting because the flat is a number that, based on your attribute, can be plus or minus depending on what you have. So if the flat, let's just say it's a 10 agility, flat rate is 10, you are trying to jump a building, and you have an agility score of 8, you have a -2 to your d20 roll, but that does not account for the CR or our DC, because all it is doing is giving us a plus or a minus to the roll. And now, where a lot of people get tripped up with this is that they're not used to minusing because of attributes or gaining because of attributes, because most systems like D&D or Pathfinder have a basis plus 1, 2, 3, or more when you reach a certain threshold for your attribute, whereas reemergence keeps it to a DM level to make something easier or harder depending on where your game is and how you want to make your game feel. This is because if your game is meant to be difficult, you can make it difficult. If you want it to be easier to introduce new people to TTRPGs or just over to the table in general, you are more than able to do so. And so the flat is basically there as a DM tool to assist where things could be more or less complicated. And this is something that we came up with that allows for fluctuating probability. One, we as a DM or GM can actually control quite well. So much like a DC or difficulty check in D&D, but with a higher chance of making something easier or harder depending on the level of the character and their stats, plus or minus that character's ability to roll. So now obviously this could be a system you really like, or maybe you hate it and just want to throw it in the trash. Either is pretty understandable, because at the end of the day, this is your TTRPG. This is how you want to run it, and this is just a video of a 25-year-old man sitting in a dark room telling you what I think is the best course of action to creating one. So, take my advice. Don't leave me something in the comments telling me whatever. So, this is, however, just one example of my own that I use that most people tend to understand pretty quickly, and that's thanks to Antonio, because my explanation of our system at first was so bad that we literally had to bring out like a digital whiteboard to explain it. So Antonio has been a godsend, and I appreciate him for actually telling me that it does not work, or to explain it better. So now that we've kind of gone over this part, I would like to just say let's go over how this will add to our game and give us feedback and understanding of how to improve the system over time, and just general tips that I use. So, bullet point 1, while playing, search for what thresholds feel best to you and what you're looking for in difficulty within your game system. An example, most requirements for success on a d20 are within 13 to 20, depending on the action that's being observed, and this could be higher or lower, obviously depending on the level of your party, blah 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 blah, what system you're playing, but generally 13 to 20 is a good rule. D100s tend to shoot for about 70% or above, or 1 to 30% if you're a Warhammer player. D10s are typically 6 to 10 depending on the action that you're making. D6s is usually, and I've seen way too many systems go for a 4 or 5 or 6. So about 50% or higher. I've seen a lot teeter on 5 to 6 more of the time. So take with that what you will. But a d4 is obviously a coin flip situation most of the time. Evens, odds, above a 3 or 4, or whatever it is, right? And really honing in on what difficulty level you're aiming for can change a lot, especially because you want it to fit your theme, like we talked about in part 1. Just remember that there is a ton that goes into that, no matter what stage we're in this process. With mechanics, we're actually searching for something that fits that idea. Let's just say it's a Dark Souls-esque game, then by all means, make it a difficult check, or a difficult combat step, or a difficult draw, or a difficult whatever you want. Just remember as well that the player should enjoy and feel like they have a chance to accomplish the goal, be it by using other mechanics in the game to succeed. And this doesn't mean that you just hand it to them, however, but just something that we should be aware of while playing is if you're playing it, you've got to be able to succeed, and depending on what kind of difficulty level you want, really depends on whether or not you're going to reach the audience that you're going to reach, because there is an audience for everyone. So don't feel like you don't have an audience if it's hard or if it's too easy or whatever you're trying to go with. But if you aren't having fun or you're just getting frustrated, Just try setting the bar lower or trying another mechanic that might help this one, because if multiples are used in a system, just make sure that it is fun and can be accomplished. Impossibility is fun for very few people, so make sure that it feels good to you, and then we can actually start to seek out some additional feedback. And while playing with friends, just ask them how they feel about it, or if you're working with a partner, let them know what you're trying to do, because Antonio has saved my ass from a lot of headaches that way. But if that's not the case and you don't have somebody like that, I wouldn't I wouldn't put too much fret on it. There is a lot we can do just by ourselves without the playtest phase yet. Again, we're just playing by ourselves or scenarios with a few people, and this is something that we see a lot of people tend to get stuck. Me and Antonio both. We've done the show and talked to people before. You get stuck quite often, and unfortunately, it's just not something that people like, and they give up on projects because of it. But if you feel stuck or feel like a system isn't coming together the way you hoped it would, this is where we're early enough. This is still sketch phase. We're still early enough to rewrite it or find different areas of expertise, and this can be a time to really hone something from a loose idea to a solid one. So don't just give up. If it doesn't go the way that you want it to in the first few tries, I guarantee you that this is just something you have to push through and try again. Much like hammering out a piece of steel, it takes a lot of time to get to where you want it to. But of course, this is a small part of a bigger picture, and I look forward to part 3 and teaching you guys more on how to craft your own TTRPG. And maybe you think my videos are horrible and stupid. Just let me know down below what y'all think. And in the future videos, I'm going to be sharing links as we progress and where you can find things and where we can go. So in part 3, you can expect to start seeing some links to things, where what we use, how we do it, and it's going to be all free to use and available to you at any moment. So don't worry about putting money into those kind of programs, because there is free use programs out there that can help you out a ton. And so if you want to go check those out, I highly suggest it. We are not sponsored by them, although we would love to be sponsored by our friends for these things, but we're not currently. So don't feel like we're trying to push you to use those specific products if you want to pay for something. But this is just for those that might be on a budget. So when we get to that point, I'll be sharing a little more. But until next time, everyone, I hope you enjoyed part 2, and of course, remember, DMs, stay dastardly.